The rain fell on the city like a judgment. It wasn't the gentle, life-giving kind, but a cold, percussive deluge that hammered against the windows of the City General Hospital emergency room, each drop a tiny fist against the glass. Inside, another kind of storm raged, one of controlled chaos, antiseptic smells, and the steady, urgent rhythm of life fighting death. This was Dr. Eris Thorne's world. At 38, she moved through the bedlam, not with the frantic energy of a novice, but with the focused grace of a master craftsman. Her dark hair was pulled back in a tight, functional bun, and her blue eyes, framed by exhaustion, missed nothing. "Chest tube tray now," she commanded, her voice cutting through the din of beeping monitors and pained groans. "And get me another unit of ONEG on standby." Her team, a well-oiled machine of residents and nurses, moved instantly. They were working on a trauma from a multi-car pileup on the interstate, a man whose chest had taken the full impact of a steering column. Beside him, a child wailed, her small body struggling for air against a severe anaphylactic shock. Eris was a whirlwind, a general on a battlefield of her own choosing, directing her forces with precise, life-saving orders. She had just finished inserting an EpiPen into the child's thigh when a new face appeared at her elbow, a man in a suit, his tie slightly askew but his expression one of crisp, administrative annoyance. He held a tablet. "Dr. Thorne," he said, his voice a low intrusion into the symphony of crisis. "The preliminary on the MVA in Bay 2. Did we absolutely need to order a pan scan? His insurance is flagging it as non-essential until—" Eris didn't even turn fully. She glanced at the man, then back at the patient, whose breathing was finally steadying. "Mr. Henderson," she said, her tone dangerously calm, "we'll worry about his wallet after we make sure his brain isn't bleeding into his skull. You can add that to your report." Henderson, a junior administrator barely out of his MBA program, flushed and retreated. It was a familiar dance. Eris was a brilliant physician, a legend in the ER, but she was a thorn in the side of the hospital's ever-expanding corporate arm. To her, medicine was a calling. To them, it was a business, and patients were columns on a spreadsheet. The police radio, usually just background static by the nurse's station, crackled with an unusual intensity. Chatter about a citywide manhunt for a fugitive, some federal case. Eris paid it no mind. The only manhunt she was on was the one against the clock, the one for a steady pulse and a clean airway. Maya Chu, a junior nurse with wide, earnest eyes, watched Eris with a mixture of awe and terror. She'd only been in the ER for 6 months, and every shift with Dr. Thorne was a masterclass in both medicine and defiance. Eris caught her staring and gave her a rare, quick nod of encouragement that made Maya's shoulders straighten. Then, the ambulance bay doors hissed open again, and the night's pivotal player arrived. He was wheeled in on a gurney, a ghost of a man drenched in rain and blood. He was unconscious, his face pale and clammy, a dark, blossoming stain spreading across the abdomen of his tattered jacket. "John Doe," the paramedic yelled. "GSW to the abdomen, found in an alley downtown. BP is 80 over palp, pulse thready at 130. The controlled chaos of the ER coalesced into a single point of focus. Eris met the gurney as it rolled through the doors, her eyes already scanning, assessing, diagnosing. "Trauma Bay 1, she ordered. "Let's move." They swarmed him, cutting away the soaked clothing. The gunshot wound was ugly, a ragged entry point just below the ribs. His blood pressure was plummeting. He was crashing. "He's bottoming out. I need 2 units of ONEG now." Eris's voice was steel. "Maya, get the ultrasound. I need to check for internal bleeding. Page surgery, tell them we're coming up. Move." She worked with a fierce, impersonal intimacy, her hands pressing, probing, fighting to keep this stranger's life from slipping away. She performed a rapid sequence intubation, the plastic tube sliding down his throat to breathe for him. The first unit of blood was squeezed into his veins. For a harrowing minute, the monitor flatlined, an electronic scream that signified the end. Eris didn't hesitate. "Starting compressions," she announced, her hands finding the correct position on his chest, pushing in a steady, powerful rhythm. "Come on! Come on!" After what felt like an eternity, a single, blessed blip appeared on the screen. Then, another. A weak, tenuous rhythm. They had a pulse back. He was alive, pulled back from the very edge of the abyss. A collective, unspoken sigh of relief filled the bay. It was a victory, a testament to her skill and her team's dedication. It was in this moment of fragile triumph that the sterile medical atmosphere was shattered. Two men, built like brick walls and clad in dark tactical gear with FBI emblazoned in bold yellow letters, strode into the trauma bay as if they owned it. The lead agent, a man in his 40s with a square jaw and cold, cynical eyes, flashed a badge at Eris. "Special Agent Marcus Rourke," he said, his voice low and hard. "This man is Daniel Cole. He's a federal fugitive wanted for treason and aiding a terrorist organization. We're taking him into custody." The name meant nothing to Eris. The title fugitive was irrelevant. All she saw was her patient, whose life was hanging by a thread she had just painstakingly refastened. Rourke gestured to two of his own medics standing behind him. "My team will take it from here. We're moving him to a secure facility." Eris physically stepped between the agent and the gurney, her 5'7" frame a surprisingly formidable obstacle. "Absolutely not," she said, her voice leaving no room for argument. "This patient is hemodynamically unstable. He has a bullet lodged near his renal artery. If you so much as jostle him on the way to the elevator, he could hemorrhage and die within minutes. He needs immediate surgery." Rourke's eyes narrowed. He was a man accustomed to being obeyed, to seeing people shrink before the weight of his authority. He wasn't accustomed to being told no by a doctor in scrubs. "Doctor," he said, his voice dripping with condescension, "I appreciate your professional opinion, but this is a matter of national security. I have a federal warrant that supersedes your hospital's protocol. He's a flight risk and a danger to everyone in this building. He goes with us. Now." The standoff was electric, a clash of two immovable worlds. The absolute authority of the law versus the absolute sanctity of a life. The ER staff watched, frozen. This was uncharted territory. Just then, Dr. Julian Vance, the chief of medicine, hurried into the bay, his face a mask of pure panic. He had been paged with the code word for a major security incident, and the sight of armed federal agents in his ER was his worst nightmare made manifest. He saw the fugitive, the FBI, and in his mind, a ticker tape of lawsuits, media scandals, and donor pullouts. "Agent Rourke, I'm Dr. Vance, chief of medicine," he said, his voice placating as he extended a hand that Rourke ignored. "Whatever you need, we will of course provide our full cooperation." Vance turned to Eris, his eyes like chips of ice. "Dr. Thorne, stand down. This is no longer a medical matter. This is a federal issue. Comply with the agent. The hospital will not be held liable for your insubordination." It was a clear, direct order. A betrayal. Vance wasn't just siding with the law. He was siding with liability, with risk mitigation, with the corporate bottom line. He was choosing the path of least resistance, even if it led over a patient's dead body. Eris looked from Vance's cold, calculating face to Rourke's barely contained rage. Then she looked down at the man on the gurney. He was no one to Hera name, a label, a collection of injuries. But he was also a human life, a life that had been placed in her hands. In that suspended moment, everything became simple. All the administrative battles, the budget cuts, the focus on metrics, it all faded away, leaving only the core principle that had driven her into medicine in the first place, the oath she had taken. She met Vance's gaze, her own unflinching. Then she turned to her team, her voice ringing with renewed authority. "Prep him for the ore, now." The surgical resident and Maya exchanged a look of terror and awe, then nodded, beginning to unhook the monitors for transport. Eris turned back to the two men who represented the combined power of the hospital and the federal government. "You can have him when he's out of surgery and stable. If you try to stop us, you'll be explaining in a courtroom why you let a man die over paperwork. My oath comes first." Without waiting for a response, she grabbed the front of the gurney. "Let's go." Her team fell in line, a small procession of defiance pushing toward the elevators. Maya Chu, after a fractional hesitation, gripped the IV pole and pushed it along, her face set with a resolve she didn't know she possessed. They left Vance and a seething Rourke standing in the middle of the trauma bay, rendered momentarily powerless by an act of pure, unadulterated principle. The elevator doors slid shut, sealing them in, a quiet, metallic finality to her choice. The surgery was a grueling 6-hour marathon. Eris and the surgical team worked under a cloud of tension, knowing that federal agents were waiting just outside the operating theater. But inside that sterile room, the only thing that mattered was the delicate dance of clamp and scalpel. Eris, assisting the lead surgeon, was a rock. They navigated the treacherous territory around the patient's kidney, located the bullet, and removed it. They repaired the damaged artery, stemmed the bleeding, and stitched him closed. When they were finished, Daniel Cole was alive. He was weak, critical, but stable. Exhausted but satisfied, Eris stripped off her scrubs and made her way to the recovery area to check on him. Agent Rourke was there, a silent, glowering sentinel outside the glass door. He didn't speak to her, but his eyes promised retribution. The summons came less than an hour later. A crisp, impersonal email on her phone. Dr. Thorne, please report to Dr. Vance's office at 8:00 am sharp. Dr. Vance's office was on the top floor, a world away from the grit and grime of the ER. It was a minimalist expanse of glass and chrome with a panoramic view of the city she had just spent the night serving. Vance didn't offer her a seat. He stood behind his massive oak desk, a file in his hand, his posture radiating a cold, final authority. Eris, he began, foregoing the formality of her title, a clear power play. Last night, you directly disobeyed an order from me, your superior, and from a federal agent in the course of his duties. You exposed this hospital to catastrophic legal and financial risk. You endangered your team and other patients by bringing a potentially violent fugitive into the heart of this facility. I saved a man's life, Julian, Eris said, her voice flat with fatigue. That's my job. Your job, Vance countered, his voice rising, is to follow the protocols and policies that keep this institution running. Your job is to be a part of a team, a system, not to engage in acts of reckless moral grandstanding. What you did was not heroic. It was selfish. It was about your ego, your need to be the righteous one. He opened the file and slid a single sheet of paper across the desk, a termination letter. For gross insubordination, violation of hospital protocol, and reckless endangerment of staff and hospital reputation, your employment with City General is terminated, effective immediately, he stated, the words perfectly rehearsed. Security will escort you to your locker and then off the premises. The finality of it was like a physical blow. 15 years, all the holidays she'd missed, the relationships that had withered from neglect, the mountain of student debt she was still climbing, all of it sacrificed for this job, this calling, gone. You didn't even ask if he survived the surgery, Eris said, her voice a quiet marvel of disbelief. The patient's condition is no longer your concern, Vance said coolly. Clear out your locker. The walk of shame through the ER was a unique form of torture. The morning shift was on, and the news of her firing had already spread. Colleagues she had shared battlefield humor with just yesterday suddenly found the floor tiles intensely interesting. Friends who had been to her apartment for dinner now looked straight through her. It was as if she had become a ghost in her own life. A security guard, a man whose son she had treated for a broken arm, followed her with a pained, apologetic expression. Only one person broke the wall of silence. Maya Chu, her eyes red-rimmed, rushed to her as she was taping up a small cardboard box with her belongings. Dr. Thorne, Maya stammered, tears welling. What you did, it was the right thing. It was... A senior nurse shot Maya a sharp, warning glare, and the young nurse shrank back, whispering a final, choked, "Thank you," before hurrying away. Eris walked out of the automatic doors of City General for the last time, the cold morning air hitting her face. The rain had stopped, but the sky was a flat, unforgiving gray. She was unemployed, disgraced, and utterly alone. It didn't take long for the other shoe to drop. By the time she reached her small, sparsely furnished apartment, her phone was buzzing with notifications. Her story was the lead item on every local news channel, and the narrative was a hatchet job. Rogue doctor harbors fugitive terrorist, screamed one headline. City General Doc obstructs FBI in manhunt, blared another. The reports were filled with carefully selected sound bites. There was Dr. Vance, looking somber and responsible, talking about prioritizing the safety of our community and our staff. There was an unnamed federal source, clearly Rourke confirming that Dr. Thorne's unconscionable actions had delayed a critical national security operation and allowed a dangerous criminal access to a vulnerable public space. Her photo, a tired-looking ID badge picture, was plastered everywhere. The public reaction was swift and brutal. Social media became a cesspool of hatred directed at her. She was a traitor, a terrorist sympathizer, a disgrace to her profession. Her address, a detail she couldn't fathom how they got, was posted on a fringe political forum. The threats began to trickle in, first online, then as texts to her phone. She sat on her couch, the cardboard box from her locker on the floor, and watched as the life she had painstakingly built was systematically dismantled and set on fire by people who knew nothing about her, nothing about that night, nothing about the oath that was the very bedrock of her soul. 2 days later, the legal vice began to tighten. She received a formal summons to appear for questioning. The interrogation room in the downtown federal building was as gray and soulless as the sky outside. Agent Rourke sat across a metal table from her, a thin file in front of him. He didn't have her pro bono lawyer present, claiming this was just a preliminary interview. The session was not an inquiry, it was an exercise in psychological warfare. Rourke was a master of it. He was condescending, accusatory, and relentless. "So let me get this straight, doctor," he began, leaning forward, his voice a low, menacing purr. "You, with your years of medical school and your fancy degree, decided in a split second that you knew better than the entire Federal Bureau of Investigation? You put your career, your freedom, on the line for a man you'd never met? It doesn't add up." He paused, letting the silence hang in the air. "Unless, of course, you're part of his network. Unless this wasn't a random John Doe. Unless you were expecting him." "That's absurd," Eris said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "He was a patient. My only motive was to keep him from dying on my table." "Ah, yes, the oath," Rourke sneered, making air quotes with his fingers. "It's a noble sentiment, but your oath doesn't give you the right to break the law, aiding and abetting a fugitive. Obstruction of justice. These aren't just words, doctor. They carry sentences. 10, maybe 15 years. You'll have plenty of time to think about your oath in a federal prison." He was trying to break her, to bully her into a confession of some imagined conspiracy. Every answer she gave, he twisted. Her dedication was obsession. Her principles were arrogance. He represented a system that wasn't interested in truth or justice, only in closing a file, in securing a conviction. Despite the terror coiling in her gut, Eris held her ground, calmly repeating her simple, unassailable truth. She was a doctor. She saved a life. It was all she had left to cling to. Her refusal to break only seemed to infuriate Rourke more. He ended the interview abruptly, standing over her. "You've made a powerful enemy, Dr. Thorne. We're not done here. Not by a long shot." As she left the federal building, blinking in the harsh afternoon light, Eris felt the full weight of the forces arrayed against her. Her hospital, the media, the public, the FBI. It was her, a lone, unemployed doctor, against the world. Hope was a luxury she could no longer afford. Miles away, in the cluttered, coffee-stained office of the online investigative news outlet, The Vanguard, Ben Carter scrolled through the torrent of hate directed at Dr. Eris Thorne. He was a veteran journalist in his late 40s, with the weary eyes and rumpled suit of a man who'd seen too many ideals curdle into cynicism. His editor wanted a quick, 500-word piece, a local angle on the national story, something that echoed the prevailing narrative of the rogue doctor. It was easy clicks. But something gnawed at Ben. He pulled up Eris Thorne's professional record. It was impeccable. Top of her class at Johns Hopkins, glowing recommendations. A decorated career at one of the country's toughest ERs. This wasn't the profile of a reckless ideologue or a terrorist sympathizer. Then he looked at the official story about the fugitive, Daniel Cole. It was too neat. A cybersecurity analyst suddenly turned traitor? It felt thin, packaged for public consumption. Why would a doctor like Eris, with everything to lose, throw it all away for a man she'd never met? The why was the missing piece. The why was always the real story. Ignoring his editor's assignment, Ben started digging. He spent hours falling down a rabbit hole of encrypted files and technical jargon related to Cole's indictment. He pulled up publicly available contracts for a defense contractor named Ethelred Security, the company Cole had worked for. He made a few calls to old, dusty sources in the intelligence community, men who traded in whispers and hypotheticals. "Ethelred?" One source coughed over the phone. "Stay away from them, Ben. They're a snake pit. The kind of snake pit that has friends on the hill." That was all the encouragement he needed. He then got an anonymous, encrypted email. "They're lying about Dr. Thorne. She saved his life. I saw the whole thing. Please help her." The sender's signature was simply a nurse at City General, Maya Cho. The email contained a phone number for Eris. Ben stared at the number for a long time. He knew this call could change everything for him and for her. He took a deep breath and dialed. Eris answered on the fourth ring, her voice wary and brittle. "Hello? Dr. Thorne? My name is Ben Carter. I'm a reporter with the Vanguard." He heard her sigh, a sound of pure exhaustion. "I have nothing to say. The hospital and the FBI have made their statements." "I'm not interested in their statements," Ben said quickly, trying to keep her on the line. "I've read them. I've also read your entire publication history in the New England Journal of Medicine. I read the piece you wrote about patient ethics and emergency triage. I know what they're all saying about you, but I also have a feeling they're not telling the whole story. I'm not interested in the fugitive. I'm interested in why a good doctor did what you did. I think your why is the real story here." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Eris was used to being attacked, accused, and threatened. She wasn't used to being understood. For the first time in days, a tiny, fragile flicker of hope ignited within her. "What do you want to know?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. That conversation was the spark. Ben Carter, fueled by 2 decades of suppressed journalistic fury, dove headfirst into the case of Daniel Cole. He worked around the clock from his messy apartment, the walls covered in notes and printouts, a chaotic map of a hidden truth. He discovered that the flawed surveillance tech that Aethelred Security had sold to the government wasn't just buggy, it was designed with a deliberate, hidden backdoor. Ethelred was using its access to government systems to conduct corporate espionage on a massive scale, stealing proprietary data from rival corporations and selling it to foreign entities. The catastrophic intelligence failure mentioned in the news wasn't Cole's fault. It was the direct result of Ethelred's treasonous side hustle. Daniel Cole was the analyst who had stumbled upon the back door. He was a patriot, a whistleblower who had gathered evidence and was preparing to take it to the Department of Justice when Aethelred's powerful internal security divisions, staffed with ex-feds like Rourke, got wind of it. They moved with terrifying speed, wiping his files, planting fabricated evidence on his servers, and branding him a domestic terrorist. The federal manhunt wasn't to capture a traitor, it was to silence a witness before he could talk. Ben cross-referenced flight manifests, shell corporations, and encrypted communications he obtained from a source deep within the tech world. He had the proof. It was a bombshell, a story of corruption that reached the highest levels of corporate and political power. He typed with a feverish intensity, the clicks of his keyboard a drumbeat of justice. The article he wrote was not a short news piece, but a long-form, meticulously documented exposé. It was a masterwork of investigative journalism. He hit publish in the dead of night. The headline was stark and uncompromising. The fugitive Dr. Thorne saved wasn't a terrorist. He was a whistleblower exposing a traitor in our midst. The internet, which had been the instrument of Eris's humiliation, now became the vessel of her potential salvation. The article didn't just go viral, it exploded. It was shared by the thousands, then tens of thousands. It was picked up by major news aggregators, then cable news channels. The narrative didn't just shift, it was ripped apart and rewritten in real time. Ben knew this was the moment. He called Eris. "The world is listening now," he said. "You need to speak, not to defend yourself, just to tell them who you are." He came to her apartment with a single camera and a laptop. The live-streamed interview was raw and unpolished, which only added to its power. Eris, looking directly into the small lens, was nervous but composed. She radiated an aura of quiet, unshakable integrity. She didn't speak of Aethelred or the conspiracy. She didn't attack Dr. Vance or Agent Rourke. She simply and eloquently explained her own heart. "When a patient comes through the doors of my ER," she began, her voice clear and steady, "I don't see a label. I don't see a rich man, a poor man, a citizen, or a fugitive. I see a human being whose life is in my hands. My oath, the Hippocratic Oath, is not conditional. It doesn't say, 'First, do no harm,' unless it's inconvenient. It doesn't say, 'I will care for the sick,' provided they have the right paperwork. It is absolute." She took a breath, her gaze unwavering. "That night, I was presented with a choice between a man's life and a protocol. I chose life. And I would do it again tomorrow. If that makes me a criminal in the eyes of the law, then I suggest we have a long, hard look at what our laws are protecting. I'm a doctor. I did my duty. That's all." The monologue was a cultural detonation. The clip was sliced, shared, and replayed across every platform. "Stand with Dr. Thorne" became the #1 trending topic worldwide. The rage that had been a toxic flood aimed at her now became a tidal wave of support, turning back on its sources with ferocious power. Protesters, many of them doctors and nurses in their scrubs, gathered outside City General Hospital. Their signs were clever and cutting: Hippocrates, not hypocrites, Eris's oath, Vance's prophets. A GoFundMe for her legal defense, started by Maya Chu, shattered its goal in hours. Dr. Julian Vance went from being the face of corporate responsibility to the poster child for heartless bureaucracy. News channels ran unflattering photos of him next to Eris's calm, dignified face. The hospital's board of directors called an emergency meeting. Agent Marcus Rourke fared even worse. Ben Carter's article had implicated him and his former colleagues at Athelred. The FBI, facing a massive public relations disaster, promptly placed Rourke on administrative leave pending a full internal investigation. The hunter had become the hunted. The sheer, dizzying speed of the reversal was overwhelming. Ari sat in her apartment, watching the news with Ben and her newly acquired pro bono lawyer, a firebrand civil rights attorney who had taken her case after seeing the interview. The rage bait had worked perfectly, but now it was fueling a firestorm of inspiration. And then, the phone rang. A Washington, D.C. area code. "Dr. Thorne, please hold for the White House Chief of Staff." The voice on the other end was clipped, formal, and utterly surreal. Eris held the phone to her ear, her heart hammering against her ribs. She looked at Ben, her eyes wide with disbelief. He just nodded slowly, a massive grin spreading across his face. Another voice, warmer and more direct, came on the line. "Dr. Thorne, this is Robert Sterling, the President's Chief of Staff. I hope I'm not disturbing you." "No, not at all, sir," Eris stammered. "The President has been following your story, and Mr. Carter's reporting very, very closely," Sterling continued. "He wanted me to call you personally. He views your actions not as an obstruction, but as a profound demonstration of moral courage and national character. He believes you reminded the country of something it was in danger of forgetting." Aris was speechless, unable to process the words. "He also wanted me to inform you of two things," Sterling said. "First, based on the evidence brought to light by Mr. Anyways, Carter and corroborated by our own intelligence agencies, the President is, as we speak, issuing an immediate and full pardon for Mr. Daniel Cole. Mr. Daniel Cole. Cole is no longer a fugitive. He is a key cooperating witness in a sweeping federal investigation into Athelred security." Tears welled in Eris's eyes. A wave of relief so profound it was almost painful washed over her. Daniel Cole was safe. He was free. Her choice hadn't destroyed him. "And the second thing, Doctor," Sterling's voice softened, "is a request. The President would like you to turn on your television." Her lawyer fumbled for the remote and switched to a major news network. The screen showed the White House press briefing room, packed with reporters. The President of the United States was walking to the podium. The room fell silent as he began to speak. He talked about American values, about the quiet heroes who don't seek the spotlight but who, in moments of crisis, define the nation's soul. He spoke of integrity, compassion, and the courage to stand for principle against pressure. Then, he addressed her story directly. "In a moment of intense pressure," the President said, his voice resonating with conviction, "when institutions failed and protocols were prioritized over people, Dr. Eris Thorne made a simple, yet profound choice. She chose humanity. She upheld an oath that is older than our country itself. Her actions were not an obstruction of justice. They were a fulfillment of a higher duty. She stood her ground for the life of a fellow citizen, and in doing so, held a mirror up to all of us." The President paused, looking directly into the camera, as if speaking to Eris herself. "For her extraordinary integrity, her unwavering compassion, and for reminding us all what it truly means to serve others, I am proud to announce that I will be awarding Dr. Thorne the Presidential Medal of Freedom, our nation's highest civilian honor." The press room erupted. In Eris's small apartment, there was only stunned silence, then a choked sob broke from her lips. It wasn't a sob of sadness, but of overwhelming, earth-shattering release. Ben Carter was clapping her on the back, laughing. Her lawyer was shaking her hand, his eyes shining. In his opulent office, Julian Vance watched the broadcast on a large screen, his face ashen, the color draining from it as if from a fatal wound. The hospital board would be calling any second. His career was over. In a dim, smoky bar across town, Marcus Rourke stared blankly at the same broadcast. The bartender switched channels to a sports game, but the damage was done. The entire bar had seen it, and the whispers and sideways glances felt like daggers. He downed his whiskey in one gulp, the liquid burning a useless trail down his throat. The vindication was absolute. It was complete. Weeks later, the East Room of the White House was bathed in the warm glow of chandeliers and the flash of cameras. Eris stood in a line with the other honorees, a Nobel Prize-winning physicist, a legendary jazz musician, a civil rights icon whose shoulders she felt unworthy to stand beside. Her father, a small-town doctor from Ohio whose simple ethos of "help the person in front of you" had been her guiding star, sat in the front row, his face a portrait of unrestrained pride. When the president called her name, a military aide read the citation. He spoke of her courage, her fidelity to her oath. The president draped the heavy, star-shaped medal, hanging from a blue ribbon, around her neck. "Thank you, doctor," he whispered, his handshake firm. "You made us all proud." At the reception afterwards, a quiet, well-dressed man approached her. It was Daniel Cole. He looked healthy, rested, the haunted look of the fugitive replaced by a deep, quiet gravity. It was the first time they had ever spoken as two free people. "They told me what you did," he said, his voice thick with an emotion he struggled to contain. "The standoff, the surgery. You didn't just save my life, Dr. Thorne. You gave me my life back. Thank you is not a big enough word." "I'm just glad to see you looking so well, Mr. Cole," Eris replied, a genuine smile reaching her eyes for the first time in what felt like a lifetime. "It's good to finally meet my patient." The aftermath of her 24-hour ordeal rippled outwards. Dr. Vance was fired, and City General, under new leadership, issued a full public apology and offered Eris her job back, along with a promotion to Chief of Emergency Medicine. In a polite but firm email, she declined. Her path now lay elsewhere. The world had opened up to her. A book deal was signed. Speaking invitations poured in. But Eris had no interest in becoming a celebrity. She used the platform and the funds for one purpose. A montage of progress followed. Ben Carter was shown on a stage in New York, a Pulitzer Prize plaque in his hands. Maya Chu was pictured in a medical school anatomy lab, her face alight with purpose. Daniel Cole, his name fully cleared, was seen testifying before a Senate committee, his calm, factual testimony leading to the indictment of several top executives at Aethelred Security. And Eris. Eris was shown on a construction site in an underserved, forgotten neighborhood of the city. She wore a hard hat over her familiar bun, pointing at blueprints. She was building. The final image of her story was not in the White House, but here, months later, in the finished clinic. The sign on the building read, "The Thorne Clinic for Patient Advocacy." Its motto was carved into the cornerstone, "Humanity First." The clinic was bright, clean, and bustling. Eris, in a simple white coat, was leaning over an elderly woman, listening intently to her talk about her arthritis, her grandchildren, her fears. There were no administrators timing her visit, no insurance forms dictating her care. She was not a rogue doctor or a national hero. She was simply Dr. Eris Thorne, doing what she was always meant to do, on her own terms, in a place built not from anger or revenge, but from the enduring power of a single sacred oath. The camera pulled back, capturing the hopeful energy of the clinic she had built from the ashes of her career, a living, breathing testament to the fact that one person's unwavering conscience can, in fact, change the world.